pleasure right now to welcome to our show a man who's written a very interesting book, particularly if you're a baseball fan that grew up in the 70s. It's called Big Hair and Plastic Grass, a funky ride through baseball in America in the swing 70s. We're joined by the author, Dan Epstein, today by telephone. Dan, good to talk to you. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dick. How are you doing?
Doing great, and I want to say I was one of those probably people you sort of targeted for your audience. I grew up in the 70s, really getting my first taste of baseball, I guess, when the Mets won the World Series in '69, and then through the 70s, and this book brought back a lot of memories for me, so thank you.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, I mean, it was kind of a trip down memory lane for me as well. I mean, I was born in '66, and '76 was really like the first year that I got into baseball, but I got into it pretty obsessively, and worked my way back, tried to find out what had gone on before, and yeah, the '70s are definitely my decade for the sport as well.
And you make the point in the book, right around after the Mets won the World Series in '69, obviously the end of the decade, but a lot of things switched about then, right? A lot of changes were going on in the world, obviously, with Woodstock and the war and all that, and that affected baseball, didn't it?
Yeah, and that's what I find interesting about the '70s is that you go to any decade before that, and baseball kind of exists in sort of a hermetically sealed bubble where, the reality of the outside world doesn't really intrude onto the diamond. And in the '70s, that bubble kind of popped, and all of a sudden you had everything from fan riots to, players, pitching no-hitters on LSD to, and then just like the colorful synthetic fabrics that were being used and, in 70s fashions found their way onto the field as well.
The uniforms changed a lot. I guess the first uniform change, I saw something on TV. I guess it was one of those shows on old-time baseball. I guess Willie Mays might have been the first ball player to kind of taper his uniform where it got away from that baggy pants look, right? And then teams kind of followed after that, didn't they, with the polyester uniforms?
Yeah. I think actually Joe Pepitone of the Yankees was also an underrated adherent to the tapered uni. But yeah, in the early '70s, I think the Pirates were the first ones really to go with the sort of the polyester double knit with the elastic waistband, both for reasons of durability and easy cleaning, but also just look a little sharper on color TV, which is as you remember, most Americans didn't have color TV for the 1970s, so seeing the Oakland A's uniforms with the gold and the green, and the Houston Astros with that sort of tequila sunrise pattern across the all these things looked amazing on color television.
Yeah, the first changes, I guess, were the new stadiums. A bunch of them came in. I guess the first real one, if you want to be technical, was Shea Stadium in '64, but really it was about the early '70s. You had Riverfront, you had the Pirates' new stadium, the Vet in Philly, Three Rivers. All those kind of came in at the same time, cookie-cutter stadiums for a while, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because several of the players from that era talk about how they would sort of forget which stadium they were even playing in because they all sort of looked alike. Yeah. And this was sort of the trend of the time for a lot of cities was to bring in this sort of multi-use stadiums where it'd be carpeted with AstroTurf. You could have a baseball team play a game Saturday night, and then you can roll down the hash marks for a Sunday football game, and and then of course also have rock concerts and whatever else. And that's the aesthetic that the sport has really gotten away from in recent decades, probably for the best. Getting away from back to natural turf, getting back to the single-use stadiums that are really just built with the sidelines of the baseball fan in mind. But at the same time, these old ash tree stadiums, I like to call them. I mean, pretty much all of which are gone now, but they had a certain, I feel a certain nostalgia for them all the time.
I never liked the sliding boxes. That never looked right to me.
No. Right, you mean where they would just sort of cut the squares out.
Yeah, first, second, and third. And that crummy AstroTurf, which by July would be faded. It just looked horrible.
It's faded and ripped up. I mean, it really did ruin or shorten a lot of players' careers, the AstroTurf. It was basically just plastic weighed down over concrete. So, if you dived after a ball, you would definitely feel it the next day. And a lot of guys, you talk about Andre Dawson, like he completely ruined his knees playing all those years in Montreal. But at the same time, there were some players who really kind of took advantage of the surface. And, like a lot of the infielders were able to figure out how to, not only play the hops, which were much more even than on a regular natural turf infield, but they're also able to figure out a way to sort of carry the ball to first base and get a little extra distance on it by bouncing it in front of the first baseman.
Let's talk about some of the great teams you mentioned before. The Oakland A's, 3 years in a row, making it to the World Series. Those great teams of Reggie Jackson, Catfish Hunter, Joe Rudy, Gene Tennis. A great team, but not really, I guess, appreciated out in Oakland. I mean, they never seemed to draw well even then.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think part of it was just that maybe Oakland just was not. I mean, Oakland and San Francisco across the bay from each other, that just might not have been a big enough market to support two major league teams. But also, they played in Oakland Alameda Coliseum, which was just, as it later became known as the Oakland Mausoleum, it was just really not very conducive to an enjoyable day at the ballpark. And Charlie Finley, who was the owner, was notorious for his penny pinching ways, and really did not do much to make to do any upkeep on the stadium or just sort of make it a more alluring place for fans. But also, I think those A's teams were so good that people just kind of expected that they would win, and didn't they wouldn't come out and force to support them.
Of course, the mid-'70s, you had the Big Red Machine of Cincinnati, that great World Series with the Red Sox. You talk about that. And, of course, I grew up in New York. I remember very well the Bronx Zoo era with the Yankees, and you go into that as well. That must have been kind of fun to go back and get some of those great stories about Steinbrenner, right?
Yeah, and just really, and there are so many great and colorful players on that Yankee team too, and not just Reggie Jackson, but guys like Mickey Rivers and Sparky Lyle and Goose Gossage and Ron Guidry. I mean, just really interesting personalities, and the sort that you don't really see so much in baseball these days.
And the one picture, which is on the cover of the book that kind of personifies your whole title, Big Hair and Plastic Grass, was Oscar Gamble with the biggest afro, I think, ever in baseball, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there are far too few photos of him from that era, which is such a tragedy because, I mean, that afro was just a work of art. It was like 2 feet across, added about, I think, 4 to 6 inches to his height, and he probably could have fit 3 caps on that thing. And it was just, but it's an example of how there really the concept of black pride, it really didn't enter into the sport during the '60s, but in the '70s, players felt a lot more free to express themselves, and the afro was one way of doing that.
He could never seem to get his batting helmet on right.
And it would always pop off every time he took like a big cut,
Well, this book is filled with great stories through 1970, starting right through 1979. The We Are Family Pirates, and it must have been fun for you, Dan. I mean, you've written for Rolling Stone and a lot of different publications, but I guess this was really a labor of love, just to use that cliche, right? To do this book.
Yeah, well, that's completely true. It was. I mean, it was such a treat to just be able to immerse myself in the era, and I mean, obviously it brought back a lot of childhood memories for me, but it also, I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know, and so I hope that readers will also dig into this and find a lot of things about the era that new to them.
Called Big Hair and Plastic Grass, a funky ride through baseball in America in the swinging '70s. And we've been talking with Dan Epstein. And Dan, you have a website you want to direct people to for the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a blog that I post both updates about what I'm doing as far as book promotion, but also just photos and stories from the era. It's www.bighairplasticgrass.com.
Well, Dan, again, brings back a lot of memories from me, and it's been fun to talk to you, and we look forward to doing it again sometime, and thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, Doug. I really appreciate it.